Well, the Zoom number is a little late now. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of things then. Who's ready for high school? Anyone looking forward to that? Is that something that a little bit, hopefully you're going to in-person classes. Must be driving you crazy that you've had to do at least the last 2 years of your schooling online. So let's pull something up here that we can work with together. Generally, I guess introductions. I'm Ross, if you didn't catch that yet. A little frazzled by this at the moment, but I'll get there. I went to York for a double major in philosophy and psychology, and I've spent most of my life learning how to teach and exercise English itself. And that mostly came from my great aunt, who was a speech pathologist and language something, or I don't know, it's a really long fancy title. So that's essentially where I started, and I have a passion for theater, so learning to read closer to the lines or through biographies, stories, etc. And in philosophy, you write essays, constantly write essays. I've written over up to today about over 250 essays, and I'm not talking your short, small, little 750 word. I'm talking at least 1,500 or more. So I think I know what I'm doing by now. So typically what we do for 7 to 9 is we take a look at argumentative writing. So who's familiar with persuasive writing? And I don't need any hands raised. I'm quite happy with everyone just jumping in. If you need to raise your hand, I will call on you. That's fine. But my particular style is chime in and we will figure out the natural flow. So what is persuasive writing? Anybody familiar with persuasive writing? Sometimes confused for argumentative writing, but arguing and persuading people are a little different. Anyone want to take a go at it? Yes. Did you have a input, Daniel?
It could be for like trying to bring someone at a higher level to a cause you want to. Forgot the word.
Convince is perhaps what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so persuasion is, as Daniel pointed out, trying to bring someone to your side or convince them to hold an opinion that they did not before, or perhaps change the opinion that they are currently holding. And with persuasive writing, anything goes. You can appeal to people's emotions. You can appeal to almost anything. When I say appeal to emotions, what exactly does that phrase mean? Yeah, yes, Synovia?
Pathos.
Pardon me?
Pathos, like ethos, pathos, logos.
You're very close to your microphone, so it's just kind of exploding in my ear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
So
And
appealing to emotions is pathos?
Yes, that is the path in which we are following, but in layman's terms, how do we define or explain appealing to an emotion or appealing to authority or just an appeal? What do we mean by appeal?
You basically make people feel the way you feel about some things, like maybe they're unfair or maybe something is like happy or something.
All right, you're on the right track. When we appeal to something, we are usually trying to resort to relying on a source for our credibility. When we appeal to someone's emotions, we try and evoke some kind of feeling in them to convince them to change their point of view or their reasoning. We are trying to find some kind of emotional motivation. Or if we appeal to somebody's authority, we are trying to say, well, a doctor said that you should do this. Well, they're a source of authority typically when you hear doctor, but when you start to go deeper, you will find different things. I'm getting ahead of myself there, but the appeal is just to reference something or someone that may be a credible source of information or motivation that provides us with cause to move from one point to another. Now that's persuasion. Persuasion, it's fine to use anything that will convince or change somebody. But when we argue, argumentative writing, or just simply arguing, putting forward an academic point of view, your feelings no longer matter. No one's feelings really matter. In fact, the whole idea of argumentation is that it should be cold and unfeeling in some way. And I don't say this in an absolute sense, because there is a point of view and a feeling when it comes to arguing. But there are many things that are known as fallacies. You cannot rely on someone's emotion or the improper use of someone's authority or a bandwagon approach. Has anyone heard this phrase before, a fallacy? Some of you should know it by now from English. You learn at least 10 to 11 of them in English class. Anybody familiar with that yet? No? Okay, so here's a fallacy. We're going to say Samuel cannot be a feminist because Samuel is a man. What is wrong with that statement? Well, what is feminism? It's essentially the belief that everybody is equal regardless of gender. So if Samuel holds the belief that everyone is equal regardless of gender, but we're saying that he can't be a feminist because he's a man, doesn't really make sense. His gender is irrelevant to whether or not he can believe that people are equal. So there is this logical flow that must be met. You have the soundness of an argument and the validity of an argument. Does the argument follow the right structure? And does the argument hold up according to its evidence? So we look at that as part of the writing process, making sure that our arguments are clear, structured, that they hold strength, the specificity of words. So diction is always going to be important when writing argumentation. And then we exercise that ability to argue in our literary and close reading. So literary analysis, critical thinking. We take pieces of literature, then we read through them, and we answer some questions. What can we get out of this piece of literature? So I always stick with Edgar Allan Poe. If anyone is familiar with him, he's most famously known for The Telltale Heart, or The Fall of the House of Usher, or The Raven. I think those are all that you would really know. The Telltale Heart probably being his absolute biggest. So we would investigate something along those lines. We learn how to write thesis statements, some common myths that may be associated with writing a thesis statement. Is anyone familiar with that phrase? What is a thesis statement or a thesis? Sometimes associated with hypothesis or hypotheses. Thesis statements. Anybody? No? This shouldn't be open. Let's close this up and open this up. So thesis statements are essentially what you are going to be practicing over and over again when you do essay writing. There has to be a main goal in your particular piece of writing. When you're writing an argument, well, you're going to have a thesis to your essay. You write an essay to support an argument. Okay, that may be a little strong. Sometimes you have a thesis that doesn't actually have a particular goal in mind, and it's not really a thesis at that point, but we'll get into the more fine-tuned points of that. I have this here, so we'll take a look at that. So here's something old that I was working with a set of students with. So let's take a look at this for now. Any questions so far? Anything? Yes, Amy, exactly. Sorry, I didn't see your message pop up when I was asking the question. Oh, right, it's in the Zoom call. Okay, so let's take a quick look here. For now, I don't really think I'll get anyone to do writing directly on their pages, but the way I work off of Google Documents. So everybody that would be in the class would have their own private Google document, and then you'd have various sections. So you would have, let's see, can I show you an example? And now, depending on the type of class that we would be having, the previous class for mentors that I was with did not have this, but this is typically the way I work. And depending on what direction we go, you get a board that just looks like this: your name, your grade, where you are in terms of grade level. It's not your actual grade, but the level that you are with me at. And then spelling, depending on what grades you are, since you're all between the 7 to, I guess, 10 mark, and none of you will be doing spelling quizzes. Does anyone know why it's spelling, knowing how to spell? Does anyone want to tell me why that's not very important? Does anyone know this? And teachers hate me for teaching this, but does anyone know why spelling's not actually that important? Can anybody spell triskaidekaphobia? No? Does anybody know what the word triskaidekaphobia is? Or what it means? No? Well, it's the fear of the number 13. But knowing how to spell it does you absolutely no good if you don't know what it means. So when it comes to vocabulary, if you can't tell me what a word means and you can't use it in a sentence, or if you can't repeatedly use it in a body of work, there is no point in knowing how to spell it. If you know the general vague idea on how to spell a word and how to speak it, that's the most important thing. In academic writing, in my experience, teachers, professors generally do not care if you are misspelling a word. If it's almost all there, but you're using it correctly, they don't care. In fact, professors are also terrible at spelling, but their vocabulary is immense. Right, so then you'd have a chalkboard area. That's simply where I would put any materials that you need, or if we use a drive, you would have handouts and hopefully a better organization system than this, because I didn't make this one myself. Or if we're on this one, then you would also have a workspace, a place where you're actually going to be doing the physical work that we do in class, and the homework space is where any homework is completed. Okay, so that's that in a nutshell. So let's take a quick look at some essay writing here. So I was doing this with a past set of students, and we were looking at a question. Typically, when you're writing an essay, you have a couple goals. You're either trying to, actually, does anyone know what goals you may have when writing essays? Anyone want to chime in there? Pardon me?
Prove your point through the essay.
Yes, so proving a point, that would be our argumentative or a thesis. Essay, sometimes also almost expository or opinion pieces, but opinion pieces aren't technically essays, I believe. I'll have to double check on that, but yes. Are there any other types of essays? So I'm pretty sure most of you have written some types of these. You've got your research essay. You're given a topic to examine, and then you have to report the findings of which you have. Sometimes you'll have a mix between a yes, Zenobia.
There's a fantasy essay.
Fantasy essay. Do you want to expand on that?
You basically write a story made up and just like have like the beginning, middle, and end.
All right. So those aren't necessarily essays. Those are narratives. So you can have narrative writing, which is telling a story. And if we do get to that, I love doing that. That's one of my favorite things to look at. There are so many different formulae to follow. when it comes to writing a story, you have your very typical Freytag's pyramid, which has your exposition or introduction, the beginning, the opening curtain, and your the beginning of your rising action. You have to introduce some kind of problem. You've got settings and themes and characters to introduce. Rising action, and then your climax. That's one point. Depending on the formula, you may have to have a descent into the depths, or also known as the descent into Hades or hell, depending on the type of story. Your falling action typically falls around after the climax or before you get your descent. We would take a look at that for sure. And then, of course, your conclusion, the denouement, the end, where everything should wrap up. So yeah, you've got your narratives. Narratives are good. But when it comes to essay writing, you've got your research. So reporting stuff you have found, informative, essentially descriptive essays, which are essentially the same thing, but go into more detail and provide a clearer picture than simply just providing a set of information. And then, of course, you have your argumentative or thesis writing, as Daniel had pointed out. And then, of course, you can have various renditions of these essays, but you're either trying to prove a point or inform people of something, and then you can mix the two together. Let's say you want to do an essay on global warming, but you have a particular goal in mind to sort of give to your audience. You want to change their point of view about something in regards to global warming or the factors that contribute to it. So in this case, the essay topic that I have given my students was, should students have part-time jobs throughout their time in high school? At one point we were doing school uniforms, but school uniforms is overdone and dead, and there's no point in redoing it. But the whole idea, should students have part-time jobs throughout their time in high school? We have a few working parts to this question, and if we were to write a thesis, you first start with what's known as your working thesis, or the big three. So those going into grade 9, that's probably the first type of thesis you are going to be taught. And then I still can't remember the term, but I just call it the universal thesis. There is your thesis that has the overarching main argument of what you're talking about or discussing. So if you're ever trying to figure out the difference between persuasive and arguments, if you're ever trying to make someone feel something like an emotion, or if you have personalized opinions, you are persuading someone. If your personal opinion and emotions don't matter, you are writing an argument. Now, when I say they don't matter, I don't mean that they don't have value. I simply mean that they do not contribute to the goal of proving your point. To be clear, I'm not trying to undervalue or undercut anybody. Okay, so when approaching a question like this, and let's see, should we do another question? Does anyone have an essay topic that they've recently experienced, or a question that they would like to possibly investigate if we were to try and set up an essay? Any kind of topics would do for now. It doesn't have to be presented in the form of question. It can be given to me in just a topic form, and then we can write a question about it. And hopefully without putting Aaron to sleep. Poor guy. It is a little early, I know. So we can investigate the current question. So should students have part-time jobs throughout their time in high school? I have a giant list of other questions. Let me see if I can pull those up right now. And then perhaps you guys will have a different interest or something that you might want to look at. So let's see here. We can stick to education if you guys want. We can talk about technology and social media. TV, music, video games, and literature. If you're into video games, I'm a big gamer myself. Gotta have a hobby. Gender issues, sports and athletics, politics and the legal system, or ethics. So what do we consider right and wrong? And science. Any of those topics really speak to anybody, or should we just choose something random? I have. Should sports be considered sports? See, now as a philosophy major, that's a fun question because we then have to investigate what the idea of a sport is. But, oh, sorry, I misread your question. I'm a little dyslexic. Should esports be considered sports? So does anyone want to explain to me what esports are? Esports, anybody? No? 'Cause I'm not quite sure what we mean by esports. I know we've got like soccer games and that, but what is an esport? Or do I have to pull up Google and find out myself?
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
I've got a question you could for essay writing.
Okay.
Should we try to change our identity to fit what others expect of us? Why or why not?
Should we try to change our identity to fit others' expectations? Okay, so the why or why not part usually is implied. I could add that if you really want it there. But yes, should we try to change our identity to fit others' expectations? All right, so this is a fun one. This is partially argumentative and partially persuasive. I like this one. Does anyone have any possible other questions that they may want to look at? Because I'm happy with this one. If anyone else wants to. No, yes, no. Okay, good. Because now I don't have to learn what an esport is. Or are esports just video games? Is that the simple answer to my question? Because video games cannot be a sport, but they are competitive. So the short answer would be yes, esports should be sports, but they're not actually sport. Okay, so should we try to change our identity? So let's take a look. Now, when we answer questions, we always have to consider both sides of an argument. Why is it important to consider both sides of an argument? Why is it important to put ourselves in someone else's shoes? Yes, Amy.
To not come off as biased.
All right, so to not, what is bias?
To be one-sided.
Could you get closer to your mic? I'm a little deaf.
To not be one-sided.
To not be one-sided, yes. Okay, to avoid bias. Yes, yes, yes. We certainly want to keep bias out of an argumentative essay. That is, you can stay biased in persuasion, so you can immediately refute an argument from the other side. Yes, Aaron, 100%, without being able to consider the other side, or without even knowing what the other side's going to say. The strength of your argument is severely affected. If you don't even know the other side, you don't know your own side. The whole idea that you can't see the forest for the trees, or the other way around, well, you have to be able to see both in order to consider the whole. It's just like listening to politicians argue about how to fix an issue within the country, and they only talk about or focus on one thing, and usually that thing is completely irrelevant to the task at hand. So the for and the against. Now, what strategies do you guys know so far for setting up or preparing to write an argument? So let's say you're sat down and you're given an hour and 15 minutes to write an essay based on this question. What's the first thing that we should probably consider or do? Well, we have to look at the question, and we have key words or key phrases that we need to pay attention to. So the should, what is that looking at? What does that want us to do? Just simply this word of should. What does that mean? Should we try? What's that Like it's a simple answer. The what is the should? It's talking about possibility or probability, whether we ought to or not. So dentists tell you that you ought to or you should brush your teeth twice daily. Why? Because you're expecting good results out of this. So if we do this change, or if we do change our identity to fit others' expectations, we would assume that in the case, or if it is the case that we do this, we end up with positive results. And if we do not do this, we end up with negative, or the other way around. If we're against this idea, saying that we should not, then we believe the opposite. But should is whether or not it is right or correct or incorrect. Not right or wrong, but correct or incorrect, if this possibility is true. So it's all hypothetical. Should we try to change our identity? Okay, so try to change. What is try? Any Star Wars fans here? What does Yoda say about try? So if you're not a big Star Wars fan, Yoda, little green man, simply says, try. No, there is no try. There is only do or do not. So this is almost a word that we could ignore or put so much focus on, because the idea of trying to do something is attempting to do it, but never actually getting there. So if I said, try not to think about pink elephants, you're most likely either going to think about pink elephants or not think about pink elephants. You can't ever really get halfway there, or try to pick up the closest object next to you. You either will or will not. So that is something you could either pick the question apart by saying there is no try, blah, 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 which misses the point of the question. But that is certainly something that we could just simply cross out and say we don't need to look at that. So that should be, there we go. Ignore that. Should we, and then we don't need the to anymore, because what part of speech is the to? It's a preposition showing a relationship between nouns. So should we change our identity to fit others' expectations? Our identity. Now, identity. What is identity? Can anyone explain identity? What is that? So we have IDs that tell others who we are in a country. A driver's license is a form of ID. When you go to school, most of the time, I believe, you get a student card, and that's your ID, or you get a student number at the very least. That's certainly your ID, which is short form for identification. But what is the identity? What is your identity? This might be a hard question if we're all still trying to figure out who we are. But there's a significance to understanding your terms, to understanding your keywords, and being sure to stick to a particular set of definitions or understanding of a word. Because if you work with one understanding of a word and someone else works with a different understanding of a word, you could both end up arguing something completely different. For example, if I made this statement, owning a, and this is really archaic now, but owning the CD has better quality than the download. So if I made this statement here, owning a CD has a better quality than the downloaded track. If we're not sure what I mean by quality, or if I am not specific in what I'm saying there, we could argue two different things, as a friend and I both ended up doing. He was looking at the word as exactly as he thought it was, which was quality. And I was using it in the abstract, as in there was a sentimental value to owning the physical object instead of the clarity and sound that you could get out of an audio file. So we both ended up arguing for a while, then realizing he's talking about the clarity and sound and quality that you get from an MP3 versus a CD, how they're the same thing, sometimes better. And I was saying that can't be true because you own it, you have it, it's this personal possession. But without knowing your definitions or knowing where someone stands in their understanding of a word, you could argue something completely different. Or if you start to change what you're arguing about because your definition changes slightly of a word, your argument starts to fail or you get pulled off track. So identity, it's essentially who you are as a person. So you have a name, but that's just one way for us to identify you. But is that who you are? Are you your name? Are all Daniels Daniels? Are all Aarons Aarons and Amy's Amy's? Could we always say that, oh, that's an Amy, and we know anything about them? Probably not. So that's not really identity. What else is identity? Rather popular in mainstream media now. It's someone's gender identity. So are they a male or female, a man or a woman? And this used to be a really big thing, like be a real man, meant to be tough and things like that. There was connotative meaning. So what is identity? Anyone want to? Nothing.
I think identity is how someone like recognizes your characteristics. Like, I think that's probably what it is.
All right, awesome. So that's certainly the way others would recognize us. We also have to recognize ourselves. So adding that in there, it's the way we and others will recognize us as an individual and unique person. So if you're trying to say that part of your identity is being a dancer, well, then that is a quality that is unique to you with the rest of your qualities. Everyone may share a similar characteristic in common. That was redundant. But the things that combine these qualities and characteristics, and eventually you end up with your identity. So the question is asking, should we change these things about ourselves and now to fit others' expectations? So what does it mean to fit into someone's expectations? Or what are these expectations? Where did they come from? Who has them? The who, I guess we have answered. But the what's, are they? Where are they coming from? Why do they have expectations of us? Those are going to be key ideas to focus on in order to answer the question. And it could determine the difference between writing a very comprehensive essay or focusing in on a particular path or direction. So we have a general idea of what identity means. Does someone want to tell me what does it mean to fit others' expectations? Or does anyone want to discuss that? Let's think a little critically here, pick it apart. What does it mean to fit others' expectations? So some typical examples that you could think of, I can think of. My grandfather was an accountant. My great-grandfather was an accountant. My father was not an accountant. He was an electrical mechanical engineer, which my grandfather and great-grandfather and his grandfather all were accountants. One was a doctor, I think, also an accountant, but they would expect that the next in line also either take on the family mantle of being an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor. But these are some familial expectations that are put onto us. But sometimes we don't want to go into accountancy or anything to do with math. Like me, math and I, we don't get along well, other than statistics, anything that has to do with psychology or geometry for that matter. But still, I think you get the point. So different expectations are given to us by, so we have family members. Who else puts expectations on us? probably ourselves. We also put expectations on ourselves, our peers. Yes, so is a peer the same thing as a friend? Daniel says no. So we use this term rather loosely, and if we take a moment to define it while we write, then we can use it as we see fit. We could say our friends and our peers are different people. We could say acquaintances are not the same thing as peers. We could say peers are people within the same age range, economic, or demographic, I should say. So people that live around and close to us are a similar age, but we're not necessarily friendly or would identify them as a friend. So we could say those are our peers. So family, peers, friends, ourselves, we give ourselves expectations. Institutions, so schools expect things of you, businesses, your jobs. So those are the others. Now we know who these people are, or who these bodies of thought are that put expectations on us. Now, should we try to change our identity to fit others' expectations as a whole? And we don't even have to say try to. Should we change our identity to fit others' expectations? What are we thinking? So let's start filling out the for and the against that we should or we should not. So I'm gonna, we should or we should not. Let's start filling that out. So you're more than welcome to write in the chat window or just pipe up and I will put it in. So reasons for or against. Let's start thinking of a couple of those. So should we or should we not? I guess first we should consider what as a whole does the question really want to know. If we change ourselves to fit the expectations of another, are we getting something good or bad? And what makes it good? Is it good because we've changed and we've met the other's expectations? Or is it good because we see more benefit from it? Or is it bad for the exact opposite reasons? Anybody want to take a go at it?
It could be bad because you might have to shift away from your hobbies.
May have to shift away from hobbies, we'll say. Okay, shift away from hobbies. They can help us grow as a human being. I'm assuming that's 4, so they can help us grow as a human being. And rather than just human being, let's just say person. Okay, any other ideas? No idea is, I want to say wrong, but no idea is silly. As a philosophy major, our goal is to think of every possible thing that we can possibly think of, regardless of how off the mark it may be. Now, we can attest to whether, we test whether or not we're right in the end, excuse me, but even knowing if something is wrong helps us get closer to the direction of being right, and never worry about being right or wrong when it comes to mental exercises or thought experiments. Any other ideas? Should we change our identity? So help us grow as a person or take us away from our hobbies. So I'm gonna start filling it out soon, but I do want to see some other ideas. So thank you, Daniel and Amy. Anybody else? Do we have a, or does anyone want to try and explain if they're confused or not quite sure? Okay. So let me just go down my list of who we have here. Amy, you're going into grade 9, is that correct? Okay, I'll come back to you. Aaron, what grade are you? You're going into 7, Amy. Okay. Aaron, what grade are you going into?
I'm going to 8th grade.
8th, all right. Daisy, what grade are you going into?
8th grade.
All right. Daniel,
10.
you're the 10. Okay. Gavin,
Grade 9.
9. Awesome. And do we still have? I think she's gone. Oh no. Vincent, do we still have a Vincent? Is he gone? Lost him. Okay. Everyone just keeps coming and going. Did I miss anybody? Our period. Who is our period? With the dot. No. No, it's okay. All right. Then we can continue on a bit then. So for reasons that we should change our identity to fit others' expectations. Let's start throwing reasons out. So perhaps, oh, that is in bold. Why? Perhaps their expectation is more realistic. Okay, that's a little weak, probably very similar to this, but it's good to have similar ideas so we can work out our thesis. Let's think of another reason against. Daniel, did you have another reason against?
It can harm us. It can harm us mentally, because if you're this person and someone's not accepting you and you're changing yourself to fit their expectations, you start to doubt yourself and your choices made, and there's no going back.
Awesome. I don't have to write that myself now. Perfect. So we have harm to our psychological health, self-doubt and choices. That is a good point that I should keep in there. Anybody else want to take a go? Should we or should we not change our identity to fit others' expectations? Sophia, I see you've joined back with us. Did you want to add in your 2 cents worth, maybe? No?
No.
No? Okay, that's fine. Right, so let's think of another couple other reasons. Should we change our identity to fit others' expectations? Let's go a little bit in the opposite direction. So we could say, may help our psychological health. How could it possibly help our psychological health? So we're almost looking for the complete negation of the point Daniel has provided.
Maybe your hobbies were like a little like off the radar, like doing smoking, and then your family members try to get you away from it, so you try to fit in.
Yeah, all right, that works. Expectations can be too much. All right, so I'll add that for the against. Expectations could be too high. So that could also be part of physical stress. All right, and you'll see that I'm adding little bits as well, because we are going to try and develop our major claims with subclaims, evidence, and reasoning that goes with it. Does anyone want to tell me why it's not enough to simply make a claim, to simply just say, we should not fit others' expectations, or we should not change to fit others' expectations? Why is that not good enough at this point in time?
Because
It could like, if the expectations are too high, for example, you might like over push yourself too much. Like trying to meet other person's expectations might be kind of hard for you. You might over push and then you end up like being worse in life. That's what
All
I think.
right. Daniel, as you were saying?
Lost my thought just there.
Lost train of thought. That is okay. So why is it not enough to simply answer the question with a sort of yes or a no type answer? Why is that?
Because you're trying to prove your point, and if you don't have evidence, some people may not believe you.
All right, there we go. So it's that part of persuasion that walks over to argumentation, where you are trying to show that an opinion or belief that is held is either incorrect, faulty, or invalid, and therefore should be should be completely different, or the opposing view should be the one that is held. And the internet is famous for having these types of debates, even though they always end up emotional, like is the dress blue or black? I mean, blue and black or gold and white, whatever that was, because that's how long I've been living under a rock. That was the last thing that I really know of, or the Yanni or Jenny. I'm not quite sure. I don't really follow online stuff. But the internet's a great place for this argumentation that should be happening, but it's all just a bunch of bickering and fighting. So answering a question with going beyond the yes or no, trying to convince someone, trying to persuade them, but also demonstrate that you have a brain in between your shoulders, that you can think for yourself. If you're simply saying yes or no and don't even know why you're doing it, you're not really having any kind of original thought. If you can reason with yourself, if you can show what your motivations for deciding your answer are, then you are showing to another person, at least academically or at a certain level, that you are capable of thinking for yourself. When you're told as children not to do something and you ask why, the fact that you have to ask why is most likely why you're being told not to do it in the first place. But if you're given a reason and that is enough for you, you are showing a little bit more maturity or more mental maturity, acuity. Yeah, the word escapes me right now. Okay, so we are coming up with reasons for our claim or assertion, and I'll teach you the sort of acronym, which is arguments are, and the ARE, you've got your assertion, your reasoning, and then your evidence. When we have an assertion and when we reason with it, what is the point of the evidence? Why would we need evidence? Or first of all, what is evidence? What is evidence?
Evidence is the information you give to support a fact, or sometimes just explain what's going on.
All right, so you had a couple words there, sort of in the wrong order, but yes, you are right. Evidence is a set of facts, typically a set of facts. So you can have your empirical evidence, which is composed of factual information. A fact is true regardless of what you believe. So a fact that I thought I turned that off. A fact that is right or wrong, regardless of your belief, is that the sun is a hydrogen, is a ball of hydrogen gas, and it is burning, regardless of what you want to believe. Or my favorite, which boggles my mind, flat earthers believe the earth is flat. But this is not factually true. We can prove this mathematically. We can go out into space, take a picture and show you. We can, this has been a fact since before the Egyptians, who could mathematically prove that the earth was not in fact flat. The same idea goes for the Greeks and many other civilizations. All over Asia, there were devices that could show you the movement of the stars, and it's just bizarre that we would need evidence to prove something that is factually true. but usually a fact is accompanied by more facts, observations that we make. So we get the empirical evidence. But then if we don't have some kind of empirical evidence, what other things that aren't exactly facts, what do we use then if we can't use something that we can measure or observe? Sorry, ignore that we can measure outside of ourselves. What would we use then? So if it's not tangible, something that we can put an empirical measurement to, then we usually have to reason it or use further argument with a set of facts. So you can take your facts that don't work as evidence on their own, and then you can reason with them. And with that reasoning, you can provide evidence in and of itself for a claim. So you would probably have to discuss why being taken away from your hobbies is good and or bad. Probably relates strongly to psychological health, which may end up being the bigger part of your thesis. I see the time, so I'll continue on a little bit more unless someone says otherwise. But yeah, so Waden, hello Waden, unless you're accidentally Jaden and just didn't, nope, those letters are very far apart. You're probably a different person. Okay, no, you're not a different, you are, okay, okay, sorry. I just wanted to double check. Right, I lost my train of thought. So considering both sides, now when you write your argument or your essay, should you ever mention your opposing side's beliefs at any point in time? Is that ever necessary, or is it something that should be avoided, or should it be given equal space in your writing? What do we think?
It could, sometimes you can use it because to prove that you are correct, there, you might say, okay, the people on this side say that this and this is this way because of this. Well, you can counter it saying that's not really correct. If there's like a plot hole in it, you can change it to evidence for us and saying why it's bad.
Absolutely, that is correct. So there are times that you will have to include your opposition's viewpoints or beliefs, but you don't give it as much light as it needs. You simply need to summarize, as Daniel pointed out, and then say, well, because of the way they believe this, or if you look at this actual set of beliefs, we can find a weakness here or there, and then you can poke holes in their argument, which is always fun to do. Or using that, you provide what is known as a rebuttal. So a rebuttal is your opposing side's argument or counterclaim against an argument you are making, and you are countering that counter. So it's like a counter to a counterclaim. That is what a rebuttal is. But you never actually have to explain what the counterclaim is. You simply start countering the counterclaim with your rebuttal. So you can say, the opposing side believes that you may have to shift away from your hobbies. However, in response to that, and then you counter. So that's always a good strategy. Whether or not you do that in the body of your essay, probably not the best idea. It will weaken your argument, but also draw attention away from the point you were trying to make. So you usually save a section specifically designed for what is known as your rebuttal section or rebuttal paragraph. And I typically don't like speaking about things in just paragraphs, saying your intro paragraph and your body paragraph, etc. Mostly because limiting yourself to a single paragraph is not the best idea. Sometimes you have to, because that is what is expected of you in high school. But your introduction could be up to 3 paragraphs long. You could have explication before you even get to your thesis. It all depends. Of course, we will teach you the basic 3-paragraph model of an essay, your 5-paragraph model of an essay, and then your more complicated ones, hopefully, depending on time. And if everyone does their homework, that's so important. Do your homework and things just glide on by. Okay. Now we have 3 reasons on both sides, which is pretty good because now we could develop a thesis. Your working thesis, or your big 3, is going to have your main assertion followed by 3 supports. So we could answer the question, and you always want to write your thesis statement as if someone doesn't know what question you are answering. So if someone does not see or know that you are trying to answer this question, should we try to change our identity to fit others' expectations, your thesis statement would say something along the lines of, does anyone want to try and word that, or shall I just go ahead? So our working theme would look like, nope, okay. 1, and I'm using the 3rd person formal language. I'm not saying, I'm going to try and avoid the you, but we want to try and stay as objective as possible. 1 should, and then we'll have the 1 should not. So 1 should change their identity to fit others' expectations because we take that, should not change your identity. This is the start of your working 3, or your big, your working or your big 3 thesis. So working thesis or big 3 thesis. So the 4, 1 should change their identity to fit others' expectations because, and we take a look at the reasons we put together, it can help us grow as a person. So there's our first one. So to fit others' expectations because it can help one to grow as a person, comma, 1 more. Expectations are more realistic. Let's go for the psychological health. So help one to grow as a person. It will benefit their psychological health. And what did I forget to see? Yeah. It will benefit their psychological health. And finally, we need our Oxford comma. Does anyone know what the difference between a comma and an Oxford comma are? Or is? Are? Yes, is. So it's only just one real reason. Why would I use a comma instead, like an Oxford comma? Or what makes an Oxford comma? Also known as a, I can't remember the word now. Does anyone know what an Oxford comma is? It's almost like an unnecessary comma, but we put it there for a particular reason. No? So quick little side note here. Someone explain what this means to me. What is this simple sentence saying? Let me zoom in a bit.
Oh, with that sentence.
I hope you can all still see it because it's, there we go, I'm going to shrink this. What does this mean? Right now, what could this mean? Without our comma, without the Oxford comma.
It could mean.
Sounds like you're literally wanting to eat, Grandma.
All right,
Yeah.
Sophia, is that what you were going to say?
Yes.
Yes. So as it stands right now, the closest meaning we could get is that we are trying to cannibalize our grandmother. With the Oxford comma, do we still believe that we want to cannibalize grandma?
No.
No, we're
No,
probably just
it's-
asking her to like eat with us.
Come and eat.
Yes, it is now time to eat, grandma, so let's go. That Oxford comma is brilliant because it adds clarity. If I tell you that for breakfast, I like to have my eggs eggs, bacon, orange juice, and toast. Without an Oxford comma, I could mean that I like my orange juice and toast as a single serve smoothie, or orange juice poured all over my toast, or in any number of other ways if there is no comma between toast, comma, and orange juice. Same idea with grandma. So we add the comma here because we are not only making a list, but we want to separate or demonstrate that there is a very clear separation between point 1, point 2, and then point 3, which would be their realistic expectations, and others' expectations. More realistic, helpful, we'll say beneficial again. And we have essentially our working thesis, the thesis that we would eventually turn into our universal thesis. We have why does it keep doing that? 3 sections that we would take a look at. So let's take a look at this finished introductory paragraph that I put together for a different question, just because we are going to be finishing up. So the parts of your introductory paragraph, this is a very simplified version of it. You can certainly have more complex, complicated ones, but we have a preamble, which is the setup to the paragraph itself. We provide some kind of background information, introduce any topics that need to be introduced. So I've done so in 3 sentences. And for the lack of time, I'll just read it to you. So our first sentence, which introduces the first topic we are going to be working with in one of the questions here, children are sent to school to receive an education, but this is not simply so that they can know things or that they know things. This was a very lame excuse to discuss the idea of school or introduce the topic of school and perhaps even who goes to school or what we are talking about. Our second sentence of preamble or setup background, receiving an education serves the purpose of enabling a person to become an active member of society. This was just a lame excuse to transition into the next preamble sentence to set up the thesis, which is to follow. Our third sentence, participating in society requires that one is able to support themselves so that they can be active members of the social sphere. Now we can get into the thesis, the whole point of what this essay would be about. Students should have a part-time job throughout their time in high school because it is beneficial for their future as members of society. Now, before, this thesis was comprised of these 3 points. We are trying to link the idea of having a part-time job throughout time in high school. And we're trying to link this to it benefiting somebody as a future member of society. How do we plan to do that? Our first one is having a part-time job during a student's time in high school teaches them or gives them opportunities to exercise and learn responsibility. Here we're trying to link responsibility to having a part-time job throughout someone's time in high school and how that supports the idea that it benefits one as a future member of society. Same idea here, the idea that skills that you can learn in a part-time job help you grow and benefit you as a future member of society. And again, having pocket change or having like your own money in high school as you learn to use it, etc. And all 3 of these, which are very specific in their focus or the scope that they have, there's a scope of the thesis statement pretty broad, so we have to narrow it down somehow. All of these are in support of the thesis statement to prove that you are right. And I hate the word prove because prove itself can only be done in math. You can only prove a mathematical concept, and even then that's questionable. And after outlining the 3 major sections of your particular essay in the introduction, you have your concluding/leading sentence. Your concluding sentences or leading sentences, I always suggest you write after you've finished writing the essay, just like your introduction. Your introduction and conclusion, don't bother writing those till you've written the body. When you know what your essay is about, you can write the introduction with ease, and your conclusion is just basically the past tense version of your introduction. Okay, so that was really quick, and there was a lot going on. Okay. Any questions, comments, or concerns before I turn the floor back over to mentors? Michael, I believe that's you. No? Okay. Well, that is a very quick, short version of how we would do things. I typically like to follow a similar pattern to what schools are doing, so that way you have a skill that you can exercise while your school is doing it.